Hi guys, it's Reagan and welcome back to another video. Today's video I'm very excited about because I'm going to be doing a tier ranking video. Today's video is going to be me tier ranking every single completed fantasy series I have ever read. Obviously, I've read a lot of fantasy and I know when it comes to being recommended fantasy it can be a little tricky because some series, and I will not name names, are still not even complete. So fear not, today I'm going to be chatting through only completed works of fiction. Even the ones I'm featuring that I DNF'd are also complete. But before we dive into the books themselves, first a word from this video's sponsor, which is Curology. I'm so excited to be partnering up once again with my baes over at Curology. They are truly a product I use every single day. They've simplified my personal skincare routine and I have been loving the results. But if you're not familiar, Curology is the leader for made-for-you skincare-based products. On their site, they have a wide array of traditional skincare products that you can buy and get sent directly to your door, but you're also able to work directly with a dermatology provider and also take a really handy skincare based quiz to help you identify problem areas and just elements of your skin that you want to work on. And by working directly with a provider, you're able to get access to skincare based products with active ingredients that target things like fine lines and wrinkles and acne, which is truly amazing. For me personally, I have talked a lot about my experience with using a retinoid-based product, which I was prescribed via Curology, and I've officially been using it now for 6 months, and I have been loving it. The bounciness in my skin has returned. I am just loving the results of this so much. I use it every single night without fail, and I pair it up with a rich moisturizer because I do have very dry skin. But in my Curology box this month, I actually added 2 additional items because I am going on a very big trip soon and I wanted to bring both of these along with me. The first is sunscreen. Listen, I wear sunscreen every single day, but we are coming upon full sun season and I have been wanting to test out their sunscreen for a long time, and I just really loved the packaging of this and the applicator, and I thought this would be perfect to travel with. Alongside of that, I also grabbed their new product, which is called Barrier Balm. This is a skin protectant that hydrates and also protects the skin, and when I fly on airplanes, my skin freaks out and it gets super dry and I get these really irritated patches sometimes. So this is a really nice thing to be able to apply, not to mention because I'm going to be traveling, it's a nice way to protect various areas of my skin on the go. And also the size is perfect for traveling too. Per usual, I of course have a very special offer, which I will leave linked down below. But thank you so much to Curology for sponsoring this video. But without further ado, let's go ahead and dive back into the recommendations. 5 specific categories here to organize all of the books I'm going to be chatting about today. I think I have 97 different titles to talk about. For context, these are either all completed series, regardless if I finish them or DNF'd them, or standalones, because standalones are technically completed within the fantasy genre. The categories I have here are all-time fave, great, good, okay, or DNF/nah. So basically, I wish I DNF'd it, but for some reason, I finished it. So without further ado, let's go ahead and dive right in. Starting off, we have The Furies of Calderon by Jim Butcher, which I'm going to put at the top of good. This is a series I completed in high school. I remember really enjoying it. I'm not sure how much I would love it upon a reread, but I still would recommend it. The very classic chosen one fantasy book following a young man who's basically plucked out of the unknown, discovers he has immense power. Stylized, I would say it's like Pokemon meets the Lost Roman Legion, very military forward, very coming of age. We have a school setting, but it's a lot of combat. There are other characters to follow too. It's very classic. I remember liking it, but it's been a long time. So I'm just gonna put that at the top of good. Next up, we have the Percy Jackson and the Olympian series. Listen. Percy Jackson was fundamental to me as a child, but I also reread this series last year, and in my opinion, it completely held up. Truly one of the best middle grade series out there. I adored it. It's fun, full of adventure and friendship and all the Greek myths. It's just so great. Poison Study by Maria V. Snyder. This is another one I actually want to reread. I read this trilogy in college, I want to say. A more romance-centered fantasy series following a woman who basically makes an agreement for her freedom. She's in prison and she agrees to become a poison tester, which is a very dangerous job, and she gets wrapped up in all sorts of politics. This also centers magic and like her pursuit of power and finding herself. Again, romance, but it does kind of grow politically throughout the rest of the trilogy, and I remember really enjoying it. So I'm going to put it at the top of good too. The X-Hex is okay. Like, there's nothing really wrong with this book. It's a kind of like small town romance with like a dash of fantasy. The best romance book I ever read, but it also was like not a painful 300 pages, if you know what I mean. If you want something that's like cute, steamy, fun, but not necessarily memorable, the X-Hex is for you. Then we have The Bone Orchard by Sarah A. Mueller, and I'm actually going to put this kind of at the back of Great. This is one of the most unique and very, very dark fantasy standalones I've ever read. It has a very strange narrative style following a bunch of women who are basically in a pleasure house within this world. They all have, their names correspond with their primary emotion, and the whole thing is a very strange, dark, and harrowing experience, but I found it to be very original, and I appreciated what Sarah A. Mueller did with this. It's not for everyone, but it definitely was for me. And we have some Cinda Williams Chima. For right now, I'm going to put this at the top of Great. I'm going to rank both of these. So we have the original Seven Realms series as well as the Shattered Realms series. The Seven Realms series is what came first, and we follow a variety of characters within a kingdom. It's full of magic, betrayal, lost power, multi-POV, there's romance, and then the Shattered Realms series is basically a direct sequel set in the future within the same world, following some of the characters we know and love. Cinda Williams Chima, in my opinion, just writes some of the best YA fantasy. She explores a lot of topics that are great for YA while still including like really interesting characters, really difficult choices, magic, unlikely people crossing paths, lots about fates intertwining. I loved these growing up, and I also really enjoyed the new series that came out, I want to say like 5 years ago. I would highly recommend these to anyone, but especially if you love YA fantasy. They're great. Girl of Fire and Thorns is another YA series. I have some YA on here that I will be putting in other places on this list, but the Girl of Fire and Thorns I also feel like is gonna hold up. I feel like this would definitely be in my like top 10 favorite YA fantasy series out there. It's such a compelling tale of a young woman coming into her own power, her own decision making. It does have romance, but it's really a coming of age story that again I read and like loved at the age that the main character is. So I have a soft spot for this series. Neverwhere by Neil Gaiman is also great. I think this is one of my favorite Neil Gaiman books I have read. It's a standalone urban fantasy story about a man who gets trapped in this like underground London that's full of danger and magic, and he has to survive. It was just really beautifully written, and I appreciated that. Daughter of Smoke and Bone, I'm gonna put at the top of good. This is another one I feel like I should reread because I love Laini Taylor, and I have another series of hers on here that I will rank higher. Laini Taylor has lots of angst, lots of melodrama in terms of her romance, but she also has a beautiful writing style that will truly captivate you. This is a story of like angels at war with one another, and like magic and all of that, but it does center a romance truly at the core of it. We have the Throne of Glass series by SJM. I'm also gonna put this at the top of good. I really enjoyed parts of this series throughout the course of my channel personally. And you know, I appreciate a lot of what Sarah J. Maas did here, but in my opinion, I also found the middle to drag, and I also struggled with the main character and finding her kind of not my favorite main character, and I found a lot of her dynamics boring. I loved a lot of the side characters throughout the entire course of this, but I wouldn't say it's my favorite YA fantasy series, and there's other things I would recommend ahead of it. With that in mind, I can see why it's really popular, and I do think it's a good place to start in YA fantasy in general, but there's other stuff I love more. All right, actually, before we move on, I'm gonna shift this here. Okay, I feel good about that. Next up, we have The Final Empire, the Mistborn series by Brandon Sanderson, one of my all-time faves, a very foundational and great place to start with Brandon Sanderson if you haven't read any of his books. The Stormlight Archive and some of my other more favorite series aren't on here because I haven't completed them or he hasn't completed them, but the Mistborn trilogy is great. A tale centering an unlikely group of individuals trying to take on an evil force set in a fantasy world with the concept of what happens if the bad guy wins, and a metal-centered magic system that is truly so interesting. I love it. Finnegan of the Rock is also actually gonna go in all-time fave. This series, I feel like, is simply not talked about enough. Another YA fantasy series that is simply one of the greatest I've ever read. This series rocked my world, and I don't even think they publish it anymore. Like, you might be able to get on ebook, I'm not sure, but it's so good. It's by Melina Marchetta. It has such interesting and heartbreaking characters. I loved the storyline. Like, I love this series so much. Then we have the Infernal Devices, and honestly, this is going high too. It's going in great. This is another foundational series for me. I mean, the Will Herondale storyline was groundbreaking, truly one in a million. And honestly, I stand by the quality of this. And I do honestly feel like Cassandra Clare writes some super entertaining series. I'm not sure where I'm going to put The Mortal Instruments, which we will discover together, but some of her more recent series I've still read and really enjoyed, and I think they're a lot of fun, centering great characters, great romance, a little bit of action. They're not perfect. They're not the greatest thing ever read, but in terms of pure entertainment value, good stuff. I'm going to put this actually here. Then we have The Wheel of Time. I feel like I'm going to have some people close out of this video here in a second, but I DNF'd The Wheel of Time. This is a soft DNF, but something about it. I read the first 3 books, and while I found aspects of the world compelling, I did not like Robert Jordan's writing style. I felt like it was a lot of tell, not show. So much happened off page. Things felt long and drawn out, and I love a long fantasy book. It's not to say that, I don't have the attention span for a really dense, long fantasy series, but I just didn't find this series to be that great. I do like the audiobooks, and I might pick it up again one day, but 3 books, it was a bit of a slog, so for now I'm DNFing. We have Yumi and the Nightmare Painter by Brandon Sanderson. This is a really cute standalone fantasy novel by Brandon Sanderson following 2 characters who are very stuck in their own respective roles and jobs within their society. They come crashing into each other's lives in a very freaky Friday-esque way where they're basically possessing the other person's body. There's lots of problem solving. There's a little bit of romance. There's magic. It's a lot of fun and charming and funny, and I appreciated it quite a bit. The Fallen Kingdom series, how about at the back of okay? This is a really minimal recommendation from me. I remember enjoying the first couple of books, but the series truly falls apart by the end, in my opinion. It's a kind of popular YA series. I want to say now I see it recommended. It's not one that I would put forth as a recommendation. In fact, it would be near the back of the line, as you can see. It's fine. It's multi-POV. It has some fun tropes like enemies to lovers. It's touted as the YA Game of Thrones, and do not listen to that. That is not true. The Golden Compass, or the His Dark Materials series by Philip Pullman, is going an all-time fave. This series, when I read it for the first time, challenged me in so many ways, and I was just fascinated by the fact that books could do the things that this book did. And I mean, there's a reason why it's a classic, and it's been, lauded for so many years at this point. I read it again as an adult and loved it just as much, and it's just one of the greatest things I've ever read. Next, we have A Darker Shade of Magic by V.E. Schwab. This series is a lot of fun. It's about parallel London. Some of them have magic, some of them don't, and characters who can traverse between these parallel worlds and a destructive evil force they must take on. It has the trappings of a fun fantasy story. It's very easy to read, and I would recommend it. Okay, now we're getting serious. We have the first Robin Hobb series, which is going to definitely... pretty much all of them will be at the top of this list. This is the first one, which is the Farseer trilogy, the first series within the Robin Hobb universe following our main character Fitz. There's a lot of different series in the Robin Hobb universe, but there are a bunch of series following this character named Fitz, and each series kind of captures a different period of his life. The first one, the Farseer trilogy, is him growing up, coming into his power, coming into his responsibilities, and coming into his initial trauma that will impact him for the rest of the series, to say the least. We have The Queen of the Tyrling by Erica Johansson. I really liked this series. It's a very unique mix of genres in some unexpected ways. It centers a young woman who's kind of thrust into a powerful position, and she has to learn kind of on her feet on how to be a queen and how to protect her kingdom from outside forces. But there's also this very unexpected central mystery that adds a very unique layer to the entire thing, and I personally really appreciated it, and I really like Erica Johansson's writing. And we have The Thief, which is another one of my favorite, all-time favorite YA fantasy series. I'm looking to see how many more I have to show off. It's just so classic in its framing and storytelling, and it's so funny and clever and shocking. It centers our main character, who is a thief, and at the beginning of book one, he basically makes a deal to get out of prison to help steal an impossible artifact, but things get complicated really quickly. It's just like such a classic fable, and I love it. Couldn't recommend it more. N.K. Jemisin's 100,000 Kingdoms. The 100,000 Kingdoms series is so interesting, following a woman who's basically forced to travel to this center empire and kingdom. Basically, one kingdom controls and oversees 100,000 kingdoms, as you might have guessed from the title. And she's brought there because she's technically related to the emperor, and he names her as one of his possible heirs, not because, you know, he's altruistic and thinks that she would be a great ruler, but because she wants to throw her unprepared into the deadly game and politics of this kingdom to basically get back at his daughter who left the kingdom and fled. And it's so good. Each book also kind of centers a different primary main character, but everything is very much connected and has to do with gods and power and the cost of power. Incredible. Truly incredible. Three Dark Crowns by Kendar Blake. I'm going to also put this in good. I'm going to put this here. This was a YA fantasy series I enjoyed and would recommend generally. It basically follows this island where there's this dark competition where three sisters are separated at birth, trained in different powers and abilities to then fight to the death when they come of age. It's dark and interesting, but I note that because it is YA, it could push some of these concepts further, and they kind of stop themselves from doing so, but it is very entertaining. Then we have the Vampire Academy, which I'm gonna put in nah. Don't get me wrong, there was a time I was reading, and I don't know if I have Twilight on here, which I technically should be on here, but just know that Twilight would also be on nah. There was a Twilight era, or a vampire era, and lots of copycat series that came from it. And in some ways, I have a lot of appreciation for the Vampire Academy because I enjoyed it at the time, but upon reflection, it's a nah from me, you know? Not a nah from me is a series of unfortunate events by Lemony Snicket. I mean, this is great. This series is so good and classic and very dark for a children's series. I mean, I think we've all maybe read a series of unfortunate events, but if you haven't, I recommend picking it up even as an adult. I reread the entire thing as an adult, and it gave me even an additional appreciation for it because it's so dark, and like the adults in these kids' lives are truly just not helpful at all. And the different situations that Lemony Snicket puts our characters in are heartbreaking. Honestly, it was more scary and more heartbreaking to read as an adult in some capacities because it's like so wrong what's happening. But the cleverness and the resourcefulness of our main characters cannot be understated. Kiss of Deception. I'm going to put this at the back of good. At the time, loved this. And honestly, if you're a watcher of this and you love YA, give it a try. It employs a very clever writing aspect in book one, where basically we follow our main character who's a runaway princess, and we're reading from her perspective and two other perspectives. One is a man who like falls in love with her, and the other is an assassin sent to kill her, and we don't know who is who. And it's very interesting, if I recall correctly. And then the whole series sort of devolves from there. It's a solidly fine YA fantasy series. I would not read Ruby Red. This series was bad, and I even thought it was bad when I read it in my early 20s. Time traveling, Scotland, maybe? Doesn't even matter. Just know it was pretty terrible. Crown of Feathers was another series I DNF'd, which was disappointing because aspects of this YA fantasy series I enjoyed. Other aspects of it I found to be very flat, poorly paced, and just not very well done at all. Uprooted, on the other hand, I love Uprooted. I'm such a sucker for Naomi Novik, and I have read some of her other series, but I haven't completed them. Otherwise, they'd be on this list and they would be ranked highly. I'm just a girl who loves a magical fairy tale leaning story in which one character has to go to this tower of a wizard who's supposed to be evil, sacrificed by her village, and he's grumpy and mean, and yet there's a central romance. I'm easy to please in that way. I understand that not everyone's going to like these tropes, but I do. The Cruel Prince, in my opinion, is actually just okay. Unpopular opinion, mostly because first book is great, second book is okay, third book, utter letdown. So I feel like over the course of this entire trilogy, if you're reading it for the full experience, In my opinion, by the end, it's not very good, which makes how promising the beginning of the series was. There's not enough payoff. So I always have to kind of warn people away from it because I personally did not like the third book at all. Conceptually great. I love Fae. I love enemies to lovers, and there's some great enemies to lovers throughout the first and second book, but just the plotting, the pacing, the concept of everything through the third book, not good at all, unfortunately. Then we have Foundry Side by Robert Jackson Bennett, which I'm going to put at the top of great. I love Robert Jackson Bennett. His writing is great, his characters are interesting, his magic systems are really thoughtful. This centers another ragtag group of individuals taking on an insurmountable power, also housing a very interesting magic system that I describe like magical coding. Also a great queer relationship at the heart of it. It's so good and everything grows really well. I can also say with my full heart that the third book was also good. I'm chronically disappointed by final books in a series. Strange the Dreamer by Laini Taylor is so good, okay? If you want to sob, read Strange the Dreamer, but not in the ways that you would expect. It's emotional and beautiful and heartbreaking and just so well done. A dual perspective story following first our main character Laszlo, who dreams of going to this lost city that's been kind of removed from history. He kind of fancies himself a historian, and then one day an envoy comes from this city and Laszlo travels with them. There we discover what is a truly heart-wrenching reality for the city, and also another group of characters that we also follow. It's so good. It's magical and beautiful and has romance, but it's so complicated. And I loved it, and the writing style is stuff of dreams, if I'm being honest. This Savage Song by V.E. Schwab is a solidly good duology. Another kind of situation where two people from two different sides of a prolonged conflict kind of unexpectedly become intertwined in each other's life. It also centers music in a way that I really appreciate. Vicious by V.E. Schwab might be my favorite series of hers, because I love an anti-hero. What can I say? This follows a character who, at the beginning of the book, he's freshly out of prison and he is on a pursuit to kill his arch nemesis. And they've both acquired unexpectedly magical powers or supernatural powers via experiments that they performed in school. It's a very strange, dark, sinister story. Again, anti-hero. It's great. I love bad people that you still root for. Then we have Wicked Saints, another series I have DNF'd. This is bad and also just really bad. Ember in the Ashes by Sabaa Tahir, I'm gonna put here at the top of good. This is a series that I also feel like is a solid YA series to check out. Enemies to lovers, set in a Roman-inspired landscape, characters having to work together, rebellion. The first part of this series I would say is stronger than the second half of the series. Books 1 and 2 are both 5-star reads. Book 3 and 4 are more like 3.5-star reads, but not bad and still something I would recommend. But just know there's a slight decline, which happens in series, unfortunately. Same could be said for A Court of Thorns and Roses, which I'm gonna put in okay. Because, and is it technically complete? I mean, I'm kind of considering the original trilogy, and I know there's been offshoots, but I'm gonna kind of like how I'm treating Percy Jackson, there's been offshoots in the same universe. Anyway, Court of Thorns and Roses, I read this series as it came out, so I read it without as much hype as it has now, let's say. I was also much younger when I read it. I do recall enjoying the first 2 books. Even then, though, I did not like the third one. I found it really boring, very repetitive, and the writing style to just not be my taste. The novella series, which I read, I did not like, and I also recently read A Court of Silver Flames, which I did not like at all. So because of the mixed bag experience here, we're putting this in okay, but I will say, Court of Thorns and Roses, book 2, was a moment. City of Brass is an all-time fave for me. I love this series. This is a very political Egyptian-inspired fantasy series following a variety of characters over a long period of time about lost magic, interpersonal and intercity conflict that's existed for centuries, if not generations. So many complicated scenarios at play that will just rip you apart. So good. I mean, C.S. Lewis is great. I'm going to put this at the top of great. I mean, the Chronicles of Narnia, foundational. But if anyone was curious, The Magician's Nephew was always my favorite, which I feel like is an unpopular opinion. Then we have The Mortal Instruments, which I'm going to put in okay. I love Cassandra Clare, and I feel like I give Cassandra Clare some high ratings, but I actually feel like The Mortal Instruments is by far the weakest and least interesting of her series to date. And you know what? I'm not afraid to say it. I think the original trilogy I loved when I was a kid has some weird trope elements I will not note now, but if you know, you know. And then honestly, the 3 additional books that were added to this series, I also found to be not very interesting at all and much, much, much weaker than the other series she has written in the same world following a new set of characters. So The Mortal Instruments goes there. It's just okay. A Curse So Dark and Lonely, I DNF'd. This is more of a situation where I read the first 2 books and I probably liked them, but I let way too much time pass and my reading tastes have really evolved since I started this series, where I now know I probably wouldn't like it as much. So I'm probably never going to revisit it. So it's a DNF, but not as like a harsh DNF of some of these other ones. It's more like wrong place, wrong time, not for me. Spinning Silver, on the other hand, I love even more than Uprooted. Honestly, probably one of my all-time favorite books. If I'm being honest, from a standalone point of view, I mean, we got Russian folklore, we got strong female characters at the heart of this, different standings and situations, a historical time period, unlikely romance, magical, beautifully written. Need I say more? Then we have the 5th season, which I'm going to put in front of the Farseer trilogy, because this is also one of my all-time favorite trilogies of all time. Blew my mind. One of the most unique things I've ever read. Centering a variety of characters set in a world that's constantly ending, and some people are able to harness the Earth's power. Written in a very strange and unstraightforward way. In my opinion, it's a masterpiece. Then we have Elantris by Brandon Sanderson, which I'm gonna put in good. Might be an unpopular opinion, but in my opinion, Elantris, while interesting, strong concepts, it was an earlier Brandon Sanderson release. I feel like you can definitely tell. Conceptually interesting, execution left me wanting more, if I'm being honest. City of Stairs by Robert Jackson Bennett, my favorite Robert Jackson Bennett series. Honestly, one of my favorite series of all time and incredibly underrated, in my opinion. This is like a political thriller meets fantasy, following each book centers a new main character, but everything is very much tied together. It's so good, so much conspiracy and heartbreak and just complicated situations that will leave you just shocked. I love this series so much. A Sorcery of Thorns is a nah. I read this and I regret it. I wish I stopped reading it after the first 10 pages. Conceptually speaking, cool, about a magical library full of monsters. Execution, bland and very, very predictable. A Starless Sea by Erin Morgenstern. I really liked this book. Really beautiful, very strange, very peculiar. I'm a sucker for any story centering a magical library, and this has that. It also has a great romance at the heart of it, which I'm also a sucker for. I don't mind a murky tale that doesn't fully connect all of the dots if that's the goal of the book, and I liked The Starless Sea. I did not really like Priory of the Orange Tree. I'll put it ahead of Cruel Prince because it is better than all of these other books, but in my opinion, it just was kind of not that great. And a lot of people love this book. I understand, but for me, it was just okay. Elements of it were good. Lots of elements of it were very underwhelming. It is a standalone fantasy novel, which can be appealing, but I found the plot pacing to just be all over the place, and I did not like it. Also DNF'd Nevernight by J. Kristoff. I don't need, this concept and character is just truly not for me. On the one hand, I love Assassins. How this book approached it was just a little ridiculous, if I'm being honest. So, a DNF. The Poppy War, on the other hand, another all-time fave. I mean, if you want grim, dark, heartbreaking war, characters stuck between a rock and a hard place, a morally gray main character who will really push you to the edge of your own moral compass, this book is an incredibly interesting and heartbreaking story inspired by real historical events by R.F. Kuang. My favorite of her releases personally, of Magic, is going here. I love Robin Hobb. I love all of her series. It's a really close race between the Live Ship Trader series, the first one being The Ship of Magic, and some of her other series within this universe. This is her first multi-POV work, and you can technically start here following a huge amount of characters, all from this sort of bustling trading town, venturing out to get their own fortune or opportunity, if you will. Very complex family dynamics, but just know reading Robin Hobb, she loves to torment you to the essence of yourself. Another all-time fave, Jade City, The Green Bones Saga by Fonda Lee, urban fantasy centering crime families going to war with one another in their city, and it's so entertaining. Family drama, family dynamics, following characters at different power levels within this family. It's so delicious, and it should be a TV show. Lady Midnight by Cassandra Clare. Here, look, now I'm gonna prove to you that I like Cassandra Clare. And I would put this series in good. I was very entertained by The Dark Artifices by Cassandra Clare. It was melodramatic. It was entertaining. Not as good, in my opinion, as The Infernal Devices in terms of like ruining my life and tearing it apart, but I do feel like she righted the ship. Then we have the Bone Shard Daughter series by Andrea Stewart. This is a disappointing one in the way that I really want to like it, and a lot of people do enjoy it, but I was really underwhelmed by the second installment. I found the first one to be good and had a lot of promise, but just found the plot to be super conventional and predictable going into book 2. It does have an interesting magic system surrounding these sort of bone constructs that are created, but it's just a very conventional series and I didn't want to continue on. Then we have the Ray Bear series by Jordan Afueka, which is so good. This is like an African folklore fairy tale story all about found family and friendship and creating a new place for yourself separate from where you're from and like accepting love. It has magic and storytelling and it has such a beautiful writing style. It's a duology as well, so it's a very quick read, but it's truly astounding. You should definitely read it. Then we have Warbreaker by Brandon Sanderson. This is one of my favorite standalones by Brandon Sanderson. I liked it much more than Elantris. It follows two sisters and it explains a really interesting magic system called Breath. And I don't know, I feel like it's really underrated and it's really good, so you should read it. Then we have Six of Crows, which I am going to put at the back of Great. This is a solid, very beloved, very popular YA duology, and in my general opinion, it deserves a lot of the hype that it gets. Again, the setup is a crew of unlikely individuals trying to pull off a heist. I love a heist story. I have read better heist stories. I have different heist stories I would recommend instead of this first, but that doesn't mean this doesn't deserve the hype or it wasn't good, because it was good, and I liked it. Then we have Senlin Ascends, which I'm going to put at the top of Great. I loved this series, one of the most unique and strange things I've ever read. Very much gave middle grade whimsy with adult fantasy, following our main character who goes and has to traverse this massive tower full of all these different floors and like technology. It's super, super, super weird. We have the Tawny Man series, which I'm going to put right behind the Live Ship Trader. This is another Robin Hobb series following Fitz and the Fool, and it's great. I love Fitz and the Fool, two of my favorite fantasy characters of all time. Truly some of the most interesting fantasy characters of all time. Their relationship, everything about it is impeccable. Shadow and Bone, controversial, but I DNF'd this way back in the day. It just wasn't for me, which is odd because the influences are very much for me. But I struggled, I think, with some of the plotting and the characters. I'd be curious to reread it now because I'm wondering if I would like it more with age, because I think the Darkling thing I felt was weird at the time. But I did technically DNF it. Another one I DNF'd was For the Wolf. I do not get why this series is as popular as it is. It's fine. It's fine. If you want to read something that's a 3-star read, read this book, but it's not going to deliver more than a 3-star read. And not even like a fun and entertaining 3-star read, just kind of like a bland reading experience. I said what I said. Piranesi is great. This is a weird book, and I love a weird book. It's very short. You have no idea what's going on at any point until maybe the end. And honestly, going into this book blind is definitely for the best. You're following our main character who's in this very strange, water-filled, crumbling world, and he's writing in his journal. And then you're slowly piecing together who he is and why he's there. It's delectable. The Lost Hours series by Cassandra Clare. I was obsessed with this. So I'm going to put it here. This is an instance of like Cassandra Clare completely won me back. We have another historical set Shadowhunter book. We've got great characters, great drama, great tension, great angst, separation, all of the things. The first two books, 5 out of 5 stars, incredible, impeccable. Would recommend literally to anyone and everyone, even though it's YA. If you love romance, you got to read it. The last book was good. It wasn't as great as the first two books, a little bit of a letdown relative, which is why it's kind of near the back of great. It could have been one of the greatest things ever done by Cassandra Clare, but alas, it's there. But it's still really good. I mean, the drama, the intensity I felt while reading it, great stuff. Then we have the Sword of Kaigen, which I am going to put here. This is a standalone fantasy novel and one of the best books I've ever read. One of the, if not the best standalone fantasy book I've ever read. The emotional complexity that the author was able to pack in a standalone book is bananas, not to mention the world building and all of the stuff that was present in this was just so good. We're reading from the perspectives of a young boy and his mother and their relationship with each other and how it becomes a lot more complex once the young boy begins to become more aware of the propaganda that exists within their country, and there's an outside threat, there's elemental magic. Fantastic. The Heroes of Olympus series, I'm going to rank ahead of Percy Jackson. Kind of gives like the feeling you have when you watch the first Avengers movies, not the later ones. But you know, when all the people come back together, it's so satisfying and it's so good and the threat is so massive, and seeing all these characters have to go on quests and save the day, it was just such a time. I loved the Heroes of Olympus series. And Enchantment of Ravens is solidly fine. This is a book, honestly, I'd put it here. This is a Fae standalone story that's YA. I personally really enjoyed the writing style. I would say it's not for everyone. A lot of people like A Sorcery of Thorns much more than an Enchantment of Ravens, but I really appreciated how the author kind of captured the strangeness of Fae within this book, so I actually liked it. Serpent and Dove is definitely a DNF for me. This was not good. The only interesting thing about it was its trope use, and it didn't do a very good job at that. Another DNF for me was Daughter of the Moon Goddess. This is going to go higher up. This was another one I was really disappointed by because I wanted to love. Conceptually, great, centering our main character who is the Daughter of the Moon Goddess, and she's fleeing across the Celestial Empire to try to save her mother. There's romance and adventure. A lot of people like this, so if that sounds interesting to you, I would read it. For me, I didn't like the pacing. I just couldn't feel connected to the story or the characters as things were unfolding, unfortunately. However, though, She Who Became the Sun by Shelley Parker Chan is so good. Another historical fantasy series following the rise of an empire as they are overthrowing the existing empire. Lots of complex characters, a deep look in identity, sexuality, and gender, and the time period, and just in general. Truly compelling stuff. Shelley Parker Chan, I cannot wait to read more of their work. So good. Then we have the first Law series, which I'm also going to put at the top of grade. Another really fantastic grimdark fantasy series I would definitely recommend. A situation where you're reading from a whole slew of characters you should despise on principle, and yet they kind of grow on you and you like them, and you don't really understand why. Also has some interesting plot stuff at play. Joe Abercrombie has a really compelling writing style, and I like his balance of things. He both horrifies you and entertains you, so there's that. Night Circus, I'm going to put after the Starless Sea. I like the Night Circus, but I don't think I like the Night Circus as everyone else. Like, obviously, enchanted, dark, magical circus that has romance. Like, I liked those elements, but it was kind of like, it wasn't bad. Like, it's still great. Like, I gave it 4 stars, but I was expecting it to be 5 stars, and I would say I like the Starless Sea more. Then we have the Rainwild Chronicles, which is another series within the Robin Hobb universe. This is actually by far my least favorite of Robin Hobb's works. They're not bad, but transparently between you and I, in comparison to the other series within this universe, not as good. Like, I still enjoyed the reading process. It had some really interesting things as it relates to world building, really expanding the lore, history, and setting of this place. And if you read it, you kind of know what I mean. But some of the character stuff definitely dragged for me, and I wasn't necessarily compelled by all of the characters. I still enjoyed it. I still definitely recommend it, especially within the Robin Hobb like cycle of things, but relative to the other series of hers, it's just good for me. Spiderwick Chronicles, This is great. Great illustrations. Great story by Holly Black. I mean, if you love fae, strange creatures, kids going on adventures to try to save the day, to being transported to a magical world, great stuff. The Justice of Kings is honestly kind of my new obsession. I just wrapped up this trilogy the other month and it was so good, including so many interesting characters written in such an interesting way as our main character is writing and reflecting on these events, which just works so well. There's like medieval religious horror and also lots of philosophical discussion. It was so amazing and I loved it so much. Every single book, I loved it. The Beautiful Ones, also, honestly, you know what? I'm moving the Justice of Kings up here, and I'm going to move Spinning Silver at the top of Great because, here. I feel better about this. The Beautiful Ones is also going at the top of Great. This is such an underrated book. If you love romance and fantasy, you have to read this. This is like Silvia Moreno Garcia's interpretation of her version of Jane Austen, basically, and it's impeccable. Melodramatic, swoon-worthy, has all the propriety that you love. Oh, I could eat this up every single day of the week. I loved it. Then we have the Legend of the First Empire series by Michael J. Sullivan, another series I really loved and recently completed. This is a very classic pastoral story, and it's supposed to represent the founding mythos of Michael J. Sullivan's world. So it's also a lot about the advancement of human civilization, but we basically follow a cast of characters who have this conflict with elves, and you see the creation of human society and the creation of like human myth and lore following our characters. It's really clever, really emotional, and I just really liked it a lot. Then we have Fairy Tale by Stephen King. This is just okay. This is a fantasy standalone. It's a portal fantasy. Aspects of it I enjoyed. I found the characterization to be not great, the beginning to be quite a slog, and then I finally got to this new fantastical place via the portal, which I liked, and it was over so fast. I just felt like the balance of the plotting was just like all over the place. One Dark Window is also just okay. Like, controversial opinion. People go on and on and on about this series by Rachel Gillick. It's fine. Magic system is interesting. It has to do with this deck of cards. If you have one of the cards, it gives you power. But the romance is so boring. There is no tension. Things are not drawn out. Things felt rushed. I just didn't care enough about the pairings of things to be like fully sucked in. And this is definitely a romance-forward fantasy series. So while the magic system is interesting, it's not compelling enough for me to like really recommend it, you know? And I even completed it. I read the final book in the duology and I felt the same. However, though, The Secret Society of Irregular Witches is so dang cute. And if you want something that's going to put a smile on your face, this is the book for you. This is like a contemporary set romance story with a dash of fantasy, and in my opinion works very well. Very cozy. A young woman who is a witch who keeps her magic secret gets propositioned to be a teacher to 3 young witches at this faraway estate. She moves there, found family, romance, second chances, delightful, truly. Last Tale of the Flower Bride is a weird and charming experience by Roshni Chokshi that I also would highly recommend. If you love fairy tales and dark and eerie stories, this is definitely for you. We're following our main character who is known just as the bridegroom who agrees to marry this beautiful and mysterious woman. And she says, "Don't ask me about my past." And he readily agrees until they travel to her family home and begins to ask questions, and things spiral from there. A Frugal Wizard's Handbook to Surviving Medieval England. This book is just okay. This is by Brandon Sanderson. Probably my least favorite Brandon Sanderson book I've ever read. Concept strong. You're basically following a main character who wakes up in this alternate medieval England, and he doesn't have any memory and he's trying to figure out why he's there. Execution, poor. The humor fell flat for me. The main character fell flat for me. And while I like the world, just the plotting and everything, this is not a unique opinion. A lot of people don't love this book. Next up, we have Malice, which I'm going to put at the top of good. This might be surprising because I was so obsessed with Malice or the Faithful and the Fallen series. This is a weird one where even though I put it at the top of good, I would still recommend checking it out because my issues with it, I feel like aren't the expected experience. I really enjoyed book 1, loved books 2 and 3, and just found the 4th book to be fan servicey, repetitive, and just kind of boring if I'm being honest, which kind of brought down the full rating of the series. But this is a very classic, very trope forward, but also trope subverting fantasy series following a chosen one character, lots of military, so many characters. So you're all over the map, all over the board, taking on various conflicts. Again, because there's so many characters to follow, there's storylines aplenty for you to fall in love with, which works quite well for me, again, until the final book, but I won't wax poetic about that. Starling House is a good, solid book to check out. Gothic horror mixed with fantasy and ghosts, two characters who both have kind of been treated poorly by the world coming together. Good standalone. Definitely don't have too much bad to say about it. We have Best Served Cold by Joe Abercrombie, which I'm going to put around here. This is a standalone novel set in the same world as The Blade itself, following a woman who's a mercenary out to get her revenge. I liked this book quite a bit. I did not like it as much as The Blade itself. It almost felt even more gruesome than The Blade itself, and at times was difficult to read, but I still liked it. The Spear That Cuts Through Water. This is a standalone novel and one of my favorite books I have ever read, one of the most unique books I've ever read. It's a story about storytelling. It's a layered storytelling experience of our main character who's being told this story, who's then recounting it to us. It's kind of a founding mythos following the runaway of a god and two young men trying to protect and save this god as they're cutting across the country. It's just truly unlike anything else I've ever picked up, and it's excellent. Spells for Forgetting is a great book, honestly. Super vibey, very great for fall, at the top of great. If you want like Gilmore Girls meets weird mystery, this is for you. Like lots of ambiance, lots of melodrama. I ate it up. These Violent Delights I'm going to put at DNF/nah. I read These Violent Delights. I almost DNF'd this whole series. I decided to carry on and unfortunately was just disappointed. I think conceptually this historical set fantasy book in Shanghai was cool, and it also centers crime families, also cool. But the fantasy did not make sense. Like the fantasy element was really underdeveloped, incredibly repetitive book over book, and it just didn't work for me. Though I appreciate a Romeo and Juliet retelling. Her newer release, which is an adult fantasy one, which is not complete, but I have read the first one, I would recommend. So there's that. Witch King by Martha Wells, I'm going to put at the top of good. This is also one that's not going to be for everyone, but I personally enjoyed it. It's kind of confusing, and I think that's why not everyone enjoys it, but I don't mind being strung along and made to feel confused. It also centers found family. Our main character is a demon who wakes up inside of a fire prison. He breaks out of it, and he's trying to figure out what's going on, where his friends are, and you follow him on a quest as he tries to save his friends. Next up, we have Payback's a Witch, which will be at the top of okay. Another fun, another small town witch romance story. If you want something that's cute, steamy, Halloweeny, this is for you. But obviously, in comparison to some of the other books and series I've mentioned today, it's just okay. But it's doing what it's trying to do, you know? Tress of the Emerald Sea is my favorite Brandon Sanderson standalone novel, so I'm going to put this pretty high. It's just a delightful book, often described as if the Princess Bride was told from Buttercup's point of view. It's charming, it's coming of age. We follow our main character Tress as she sets out into the wide world to save the love of her life. It's clever, the narrator is funny, the magic is interesting, the world is interesting. Brandon Sanderson at his finest. When Women Were Dragons is great. This is a speculative fiction book where it's set in our world and everything is the same except for one fundamental truth, and that is if someone is angry enough, they can spontaneously transform into a dragon, and this has huge implications on society. This book is written kind of like a memoir, a diary, and scientific research. It's very interesting, very unique, and beautifully done. The writing style is great. Concept is also strong. Nettle and Bone, I love this book. I'm going to put this around Tress of the Emerald Sea, right behind it. This is a fairy tale book. I love fairy tale stories, and this is definitely that. We're following our main character who sets out on an adventure to try to save her sister, and along the way she collects unlikely people to help her on her quest. Just the writing style and the concepts is dark, but beautifully done. I was delighted by this. The Bear and the Nightingale, I just said I love fairy tale stories, and this is one of the best ones out there. This is one of my favorite series of all time. Set in a historical setting of Russia, we follow our main character Vasya in book 1. She's a young girl, but we see her grow up throughout the course of the series, come into her power, come into her strength, and her magic. It's so good. Truly the perfect balance of history and fantasy combined together in such a beautifully written package. Next level, next level. Then we have Kayake, which is good. I would recommend this. This is a standalone inspired by famous myth, lore, and history of India, and it's a feminist reimagining of that, and I enjoyed it, and I would definitely check out other works by this author. Next, we have A Study in Drowning, which I would put around Starling House. I'm going to move Elantris up here. I feel better about that. I'm also going to move this up to be here. I also feel better about that. This is actually a really good YA story, but more so than anything, a journey of a young woman who's overcoming a lot of trauma, learning to love herself and accept herself for who she is. It's honestly really well done, and a lot of it I really appreciated. I'm actually gonna put this ahead of Starling House. It was good, and it's kind of academic rivals to Lovers as well, which is fun. Gods of Jade and Shadow by Silvia Moreno Garcia. I'm going to put in great. I love Silvia Moreno Garcia. She's written a lot of different types of books and a lot of different genres. I think there's only 2 of hers in here, but I've read a lot. If you haven't read Silvia Moreno Garcia, you definitely should. This is like a young woman accidentally releases a god in her grandpa's study, and she's basically treated very poorly by her family, and so she then goes out on this like road trip-esque thing with this god across Mexico. It's beautiful, it's romantic, it captures like so much vibrancy. It's so good. I love this author so much. Then we have Babel by R.F. Kuang, which I'm going to put in great. I enjoyed this book a lot, especially a lot of the concepts and topics that it was pursuing in this. It's not my favorite of this author's, but it's a dark academia standalone taking on topics of racism, colonialism, and just like the issues with academia in general, which I appreciated. Then we have A River Enchanted by Rebecca Ross. This duology is so stunning. And it's set on a magical island that's cursed. We're following a variety of characters who live on this island. And first it starts off kind of as a mystery as they're trying to find these lost girls who have gone missing. But then it sort of transforms into something much greater than that, involving elemental magic and like the legacy of pain in this place. It has lots of romance too, and it's beautifully done. The writing style is fantastic. And the last book I'm going to chat about is A Day of Fallen Night. This is the prequel standalone novel of A Prior of the Orange Tree. I guess I'm ending a bit on a sour note, and it was just okay. I just don't get the hype with this series at all. I was expecting to like this more. In some ways, maybe I even liked it less. Had the same issues, had weird plotting. It just wasn't necessarily for me. So let's take a look at my rankings here of my completed series. Let me zoom out and see if I want to move anything. Oh, I have Shift of Magic in the front. That's so interesting. How do I feel about that? I don't think I disagree with that, actually. Perfect, perfect, perfect. All right, there's that. Alrighty guys, that is my tier ranking of all of my completed fantasy series. I think we're just under 100 books and titles that we chatted through today, so I apologize for the length of this video. Again, big shout out to this video's sponsor, which is Curology. I will of course have a link to my offer down below, but thank you so much for watching this video, and I will see you soon with another one soon. Goodbye.